I think it was about 15 years ago, there was a very popular book that was a memoir by a man named Frank McCourt. It was called Angela's Ashes. I don't know how many of you remember that or how many of you have read it, but it was about his upbringing in Ireland, and the name of the city just fled me. It'll come when I'm talking about something else. But it was about growing up in bitter poverty, really bad, bitter poverty and starvation and weather that only Ireland could experience. It was constantly damp and lung disease everywhere. If it wasn't raining, it was just plain miserable. And he talked about his mother and how she had been abandoned by her husband and raised 5 or 6 kids. And it was generally pretty miserable. And from that book, I learned a lot about my mother and how she grew up in the slums of Belfast in Northern Ireland and in the same sort of poverty. And it was interesting that I don't talk a lot about my mother, but I really should. She was a character. But she, when she was 19 years old, her mother put her on the boat to America, and she had a couple of relatives who were already here, and 1 or 2 of them owned their own home. And my mother would be anxious to go and visit them for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is because they had lawns. They had grass around their houses, and that was a phenomenon my mother, didn't really experience growing up in Belfast. And whenever she was around grass, she had this habit. She'd take her shoes off and just walk around in the grass. She would love it, love the feel of it. She loved the fact that a couple of sprigs of grass, blades of grass would go up through her toes, and she just loved it. And she felt it was so luxurious to have grass under her feet. And she had a habit of, when she was standing there in the grass, she'd look around. She says, I wonder what the poor people are doing today. And as I say, she was pretty funny. But I inherited a lot of her. And when I first bought a house on Long Island, it came with a lawn, and I was utterly unprepared, not only for home ownership, but for taking care of grass. I really didn't know what you're supposed to do. But after a couple of days in that house, I began to realize that I have to take care of the grass. And one of the things in the grass was crabgrass. And this, I had never seen crabgrass before, but I was told you're supposed to get rid of that. So what I would do is I'd go out and I'd reach down and grab the crabgrass and I'd pull it up. And it came, a lot of soil was with it, so I would shake the soil out, not knowing I was also planting the next crop of crabgrass. And I couldn't understand why I couldn't get rid of this crabgrass. But at any rate, Jesus talks in today's gospel about this phenomenon where someone plants weeds in with the wheat that this farmer is growing. And his servants say, should we pull it up? Should we rip up the weeds? And he said, no. Because if you hope everything's okay out there. Sorry. Where was I? Pulling up the weeds. Thank you very much. Somebody's listening. That was a test. But at any rate, and that phenomenon that Jesus warned them about, don't pull up the weeds because you'll destroy the wheat. And that was exactly what I had done and what he was doing. It's an interesting take on this gospel that To the Jewish leaders, to the Pharisees and the others, Jesus was the weeds. He was growing up among the Jewish faith and the Jewish culture. And some of them decided that he should be assassinated, that he should be taken out. But somebody among the Pharisees said, no, if he is of God, we would be committing a sin if we killed him. And if he's not of God, it'll go away. It'll just fall apart. And that's how the faith started. But after a while, he had gotten too popular. So they decided to pull up that weed. And that was the end of that. Because that assassination, that crucifixion that Jesus suffered was the thing that started the whole movement that we see in this church today. But that was it. Had he died of old age, it would never have worked the way he wanted it to. So he knew he had to be sacrificed. He knew it. This sacrifice of his is passed down to us, and the responsibility to spread the word of God falls to us these days. How do you do that? Whenever my heart stops, I go like this. And it works pretty well. But we are responsible for spreading the word, and we always ask, how do we do this? And the best way is by the example of our lives. If we live good lives, people will watch us, as they're doing now. And we will give them the example of how to live a good Christian life. And I'm going to do this again, and I apologize. I know I sound like a broken record, but one of the most effective ways to spread the faith is when you're in a restaurant and they bring you your food, what do? You pray. But they may not know you're praying. You know how they know? Because you go like this. You know? It doesn't sound like much, but it's effective. If you could imagine yourself seeing somebody doing that in a restaurant, you'd be impressed. I'm sorry about this. So that's the way we spread the faith, by the example of our lives. So let's do that. Let's make it a campaign to bless ourselves in restaurants. God bless you all.